Okay, guys, we're going to move from Chapter 1 to Chapter 4. All right, those of you that have looked at your textbook, what did we skip? What was Chapter 2? Chemistry. What was Chapter 3? Cells. Why don't we do Chapter 2 and Chapter 3? Because that's biology, right? Is it important? Yes. Are there concepts in Chapter 2 and Chapter 3 you need to know to understand A&P 1 and 2? Absolutely. But we don't have time to reteach biology. Some of the most important things from those chapters that if you do not remember you need to review at some point would be things like transport around between cells, like diffusion, facilitated diffusion, active transport, osmosis. You'll hear me use those words, okay? Things like DNA, proteins, mitochondria. All those words should be familiar to you. If they're not, you may want to go through and at least read the summary from those chapters and familiarize yourself with those things from biology class, okay? We are going to move straight to Chapter 4, which discusses the tissues of the body. Inside of the human body, there are 4 basic types of tissues. Tissues are groups of cells that work together to provide some sort of function for the body. Once we get through Chapter 4, we'll then start talking about organs. An organ is a group of tissues working together. So before we can talk about any organs, we got to learn about each individual tissue. Okay? The 4 major types of tissues are nervous tissue, muscle tissue, epithelial, and connective. And from Lab Monday, what is going to be one of the hardest things about this chapter? Connective tissue. There's lots of different types, and they all kind of start looking the same once you've started looking at them. But I promise you I'm going to show them to you 100 times, and I'm going to embed it into your head before I expect you to give it back to me, okay? Nervous tissue is the tissue in your body only found in your brain, spinal cord, and your nerves. Nervous tissue is special because it's the only tissue that can directly send impulses from one place to another. Now, that's pretty much all we're going to say about nervous tissue until we get to the nervous system. Then we're going to really look in detail at how that works. Okay? The second type of tissue is muscle tissue. What are the 3 types of muscle tissue? Skeletal, cardiac, and smooth. You knew that before you came to this class. Each one of those looks different because each one has a different function. Skeletal muscle connects to what? Bones, right? You already knew that, so it's going to help us move. Smooth muscle is found in all of our internal organs. Where's cardiac muscle? Heart. Okay, see, you already knew all of that. Okay? Epithelial tissue is found anywhere on the body that you have a boundary between other types of tissues. Okay, so if you have a type of tissue, it's going to have epithelial tissue lining it. Epithelial tissue is found lots of places, but the main place you're going to be most familiar with epithelial tissue is on the outside of your skin. But please don't ever think that's the only place you have epithelial tissue. Okay? The 4th type is connective tissue. Connective tissue, generic definition, connects one thing to another. But it has a very broad list of what it is responsible for in the body. So we're going to look at those depending on the specific ones. You have more connective tissue in your body than any other type of tissue. Most students tell me you have more epithelial tissue. Because why? What do you see? Skin everywhere, right? There's skin all over my body. Everywhere you have skin, you have epithelial tissue with more than one layer of connective tissue under it. And then you got more connective tissue under that. So you got more connective tissue than anything else. That's why you guys were prompted to say the connective tissue is going to be the hardest. Because that's what you have more of. You got more different types. Okay? So we're going to start with epithelial tissue. Epithelial tissue has 5 basic characteristics that are unique to epithelial tissue. Number one characteristic is that epithelial tissue has polarity. Polarity means you can tell one side from the other. Okay? You can always tell what is the superficial surface of the tissue and what is the deep surface of the tissue. Okay? The way you can tell that is you're always going to have a basement membrane. That's the deep area. And then on top of that basement membrane, you will see cells sitting on top of each other, sitting on top of that basement membrane. Okay? We call the top the apical surface, and we call the bottom the basal surface. The apical surface is always free. Basal surface is connected to some other type of tissue. So it's kind of a hint for you when you're in lab and you're looking at these tissues. If you see a big area of empty space and then the tissues down below it, that's the apical surface of epithelial tissue, usually by that big empty space. Okay? All of your cells are closely packed together. That means you will never see a cell that is not directly connected to another cell. Okay? And if you think all the way back to biology, some of you may have learned about tight junctions and desmosomes. These are special places where the cytoplasm, I'm trying to think of the word, where the microtubules and the microfilaments actually will stick through the cell membrane, holding each other together. My point I'm trying to make is they're not just stuck together by some sticky surface on the outside. The insides of the cell actually interconnect and hold those two cells together. They're not coming apart. Is that a good thing? Yeah, otherwise, oops, it came apart and stuff's spilling out of my arm. Right? We don't want that to happen. So we need our epithelial tissue, our cells, tightly packed. Okay? Underneath this basement membrane, you're always going to see a layer of connective tissue. Always. And when some of you were looking in lab, you probably realized sometimes you had to find the correct type of cells, right? Because it's really hard for me to give you a slide that has just one type of epithelium on it, because it's always got some connective tissue underneath it. You got to make sure you're looking at the epithelial tissue. Okay? The last two are not quite as useful when it comes to identifying them, but it's important for some of the function, the physiology we're going to get to a little later. All epithelial tissue is avascular, but innervated. Okay, that's just fancy words. What does that mean? What does avascular mean? Doesn't have any heart. It's not in the heart system, the blood vessels, right? It has no blood flow. Okay? I can prove it to you. Have you ever had a paper cut? Did it bleed? If it bled, it wasn't a paper cut. Okay? A paper cut doesn't bleed. It's just cutting the epithelium. But innervated. It has nerves in it. Does a paper cut hurt? Heck yeah, right? You'll cuss when you get a paper cut, and if you cut and draw blood, it doesn't usually hurt as bad as a paper cut does. Okay? So that's just a fancy way of saying there's no blood flowing through epithelial tissue, but it does have nerves coming into it. Okay? The last one, epithelial tissue is special because it has a very high rate of regeneration. That is important because we put epithelial tissue in places where we usually need to make a lot of it very often. Like our skin. Is our skin exposed to harshness? All the time, right? You could do this and you'll see stuff flake off. That's your skin flaking off. But that's okay, because the epithelial tissue just makes more. Okay? We have epithelial tissue lining our esophagus. Is there constantly stuff brushing through our esophagus? Every time you swallow, a piece of food is rubbing on it. Okay? Now, some of this will be reviewed from lab. We classify our epithelium two ways. Number one way is by how many layers of cells we have on top of the basement membrane. If you have one layer of cells, it is considered simple epithelium. If you have any more than one layer, it's considered stratified. Okay? Okay, pink is basement membrane. So one layer of cells, simple. Multiple layers, stratified. Okay. The second way we classify is by the shape of cell. And the three shapes are pretty different from each other. The first shape is called squamous. Squamous is extremely flat. Okay. Cuboidal looks like a cube. Columnar is stretched out, looks more like a rectangle. Okay. When you're looking through the microscope and you're not looking at a cheesy drawing like this, sometimes cuboidal and columnar kind of want to look like each other. Okay. Now here's the trick. If the nucleus is exactly in the center, it's cuboidal. If the nucleus is more towards the basal surface and you got some extra cell at the top, it's columnar. Okay? That is the way I always did it whenever I was taking A&P class. I would always look for where my nucleus was, and that would help me figure out what type I was looking at. Okay? Now we're going to look at the different types of epithelium. We're going to put those things together. Simple squamous, simple cuboidal, simple columnar, okay, stratified. Now, you need to make yourselves some sort of study sheet for this. And you're going to need to know a couple things about each type of tissue. I'm going to tell you what you need to know. You need to know, number one, what does it look like? Okay? In lecture and lab, if I show you this picture, you need to be able to tell me that it's simple squamous epithelium. Okay? I don't care how you make a study sheet. Some people like note cards. I think they're a waste of time. But if you like them, awesome. Make them. I always just wrote it down on pieces of paper instead of note cards. So whatever you like. Number one thing, what does it look like? Number two, where is it found in the body? Do I expect you to know every single place it's found in the body? No, not really. I'm going to give you the most prominent places. Okay? Number three, its function. Okay? So you need to be able to do that for every tissue we're going to look at. We're just going to start here. Okay? Tissue number one, simple squamous epithelium. Simple means what? One layer. Squamous means flat. So we are going to see this tissue basically as a basement membrane that has a few little pieces sticking up off of it every now and then. Okay? This is the picture from your textbook. This is showing you areolar, which are the air sacs of the lungs. So when you breathe in, your air goes all the way in down to the bottom of your lungs, and there's these little sacs that look like grapes, and that's what this is a picture of. In lab, I showed you a slide of cheek smears, which means it was simple squamous epithelium that had been flaked off of somebody's cheek, and you were kind of looking at the top of it. Okay? Now, what do you think the function of a very, very thin piece of tissue would be? I'm going to give you some choices. Okay? Would you want to put a thin tissue somewhere that is going to be constantly rubbed on? Is it going to be used for protection? No, it wouldn't protect you very long, right? Would you put a really thin piece of tissue somewhere that you needed those cells to be able to manufacture and secrete something? Well, you could, but if I want to be able to make something, am I going to take something really, really tiny and try to squeeze all the stuff in it to make something? It'd be kind of hard, right? What about, would I put this type of tissue somewhere that I want stuff to be able to pass back and forth across it? That makes sense, right? Okay? So this is where I'm trying to teach you how to figure it out instead of memorizing it. The answer to what is the function of simple squamous epithelium is it allows passage of materials across the membrane. Okay? But you shouldn't have to memorize it. You should be able to just think about it. It's thin, so I'm going to let stuff go back and forth. Okay? So the third is, where is this found? Okay? It's going to be found places, generally where I'm going to let stuff pass back and forth. So does it make sense that it would be found at the bottom of your lungs? What's passing through your lungs? Oxygen. Okay, there's something else happening down there too, right? Carbon dioxide. So at the bottom of your lungs, you're giving your blood the oxygen, you're picking up the carbon dioxide so you can breathe it out. So you got to have an exchange going on. Okay? Another place you commonly see this type of tissue is around blood vessels. Okay? Because things need to get in and out of your blood. And even if you don't 100% understand that yet, you should be able to accept if I eat food, right, it goes through my stomach, through my intestines. That's where I get the sugar to make energy. Even my big toe needs to make energy, right? So that sugar's got to travel through my blood to my big toe. And then once it gets there, it's got to be able to get out. So you're going to have things pass back and forth through your blood vessels. Okay? So what does it look like? Basement membrane, one layer of really, really fat cells. What's its function? Allowing things to transport back and forth. And where is it found? Lungs and blood vessels. See, it's easy, right? Okay. That's simple squamous. Next is simple cuboidal epithelium. So what's it going to look like? What does simple mean? One layer, cuboidal, square-shaped, cube-shaped cells, right? So when you're looking at this is a picture of a portion of the kidneys. Okay? This is one tubule. This white area, that's the apical surface. Okay? That's where there is nothing. Things pass through that. Do you guys know what your kidneys do? Filter waste to make what? Urine. Okay? And what they're actually doing is they're getting the bad stuff out of your blood and they're putting it in your pee. Okay? So in the center of this is where the blood or the urine's going to be flowing. All right? Around here is the basement membrane. And this is a cell, this is a cell, this is a cell, that's a cell, that's a cell, that's a cell. Okay? And so on. So it's one layer because you only have one cell on top of the basement membrane. It's cuboidal because it looks more like a cube. Now there's not a nucleus in every single cell because it's sliced really thin. Okay? So if you took one tubule, they'd be able to make 40 or 50 microscope slides from it. Each cell only has one nucleus, right? So sometimes you may get a piece that doesn't have a nucleus piece in it. Okay? It doesn't mean it wasn't there. It just didn't show up in the slide. Okay? But the nuclei you can see. Do you see how they're just kind of more in the center? Well, that one's kind of funky. But for the most part, they're more in the center. That helps you know it's cuboidal. Okay? Now we're getting a little bit thicker. So do you think the function is still going to be letting stuff pass back and forth? Not really, right? The thicker it gets, the less likely stuff is going to pass back and forth. These mid-sized ones, the cuboidal ones, their function is secretion and absorption. What do those two words mean? Putting stuff out and letting stuff in. Good. Okay? So in this example, if there's something flowing through the middle of that tubule, if it's something good, those cells may absorb it, meaning pull it back into the body and say, hey, let's keep this. Let's not pee it out. If it's something bad, the cells may secrete it into what's becoming urine. So you can pee it out and get it out of the body. Okay? Now, so obviously we know one place this is found. Where would that be? Kidneys, because we're talking about going to the bathroom. We're talking about urinating, right? It's found a couple other places, but the kidney is the main place. The other places you're going to see it a lot is in glands, which secrete different things for the body, and also in the ovary. What does the ovary secrete? Eggs. Okay, good. So, but kidney is your main place. Okay? We know what it looks like. We know the function. We know where it's at, right? Okay, 3 things. Simple columnar epithelium. Simple means one layer. I'm going to keep asking until everybody says it with me. Columnar means what? Stretched out, long, skinny cells. Okay? So here is basement membrane. Basement membrane. One cell, next cell, next cell, next cell. Okay? See how the nucleus is more towards the bottom? Okay? That always helped me figure out that it was columnar. Okay? Now we have gotten into still a single layer, but the cells are really, really thick, right? So do you think we're going to be doing any moving back and forth? Not really, because we're even thicker than we were with the cuboidal. Okay? Could we still possibly secrete things or absorb through these? Yes. Okay? It turns out their major function is more related to secretion than absorption, but they can do either. Okay? One thing they do that the simple cuboidal do not is sometimes they will have cilia. So not only will they secrete things, but they can wiggle those cilia and produce kind of a current to help move those things along. Okay? Most common thing they secrete is mucus. Okay? So they secrete the mucus, and then the little cilia help move the mucus in the correct direction that it's going to go into. Two places this is found I think will help you understand the function. We find these in the digestive tract, in linings of, this says bronchi, that's linings of the respiratory system. Okay? Do things need to have mucus like your digestive system and your respiratory system? Okay? So while your food's in your mouth, you chew it up, you moisten it with saliva, right? Once you swallow it, there's no more saliva being produced. Okay? Don't you think it'd be nice for your esophagus to produce mucus to help lubricate and get that stuff going down? Yeah, otherwise your food would get stopped right here in your esophagus, and that would not feel good. Okay? So it produces this nice mucousy layer, gets that cilia going, got the nice current moving the mucus and the food through. Also in your respiratory tract, when you breathe in, are you breathing in beautifully clean oxygen? No, right now you're all breathing in the bacteria from my mouth as you breathe, in addition to all of the other stuff in this room. Okay, is that nice to know? I did brush my teeth this morning, though. Okay? Well, as you breathe all that bacteria and the dust and all those things in, the mucus in your respiratory system catches all of that crud and produces mucus. The mucus that has caught it, the cilia, moves that crud and mucus back up. When it gets high enough, it gets into your digestive system and you swallow it and you get rid of it. Okay? So you have horrible looks on your face. You've been doing it since you were born and you never tasted it. So I promise it's okay. Someone that smokes, their cilia is paralyzed. This is actually more for pseudostratified, but a smoker gets that old nasty cough, right? That's because they don't have the cilia that can move their mucus out. So they get the urge to cough because they're trying to hack the mucus up themselves so they can swallow it. That makes a smoker sound really sexy, right? Well, because you're hacking it out of your respiratory system. If it gets down in your lungs, it will kill you. So you have to get it out of your respiratory system to put it into your digestive system. See how many of you smoke? Y'all don't want to raise your hand now, do you? Okay. So, we know what it looks like. What's its function? Absorption and secretion, mainly mucus, located in what two systems? Digestive, respiratory. Even more common in your respiratory system than regular columnar is what we call pseudostratified columnar epithelium. Does anybody know what pseudo means? False or fake. Okay? Because this is called fake stratified epithelium because it looks kind of stratified. It looks layered, but it's really not. Okay? So over here in our picture, down here at the bottom is the basement membrane. Okay? Here's one cell, another cell, one more, okay, and so on and so forth. Okay? Oh, I missed one right here. Okay? So what are the cells doing? They're not really perfectly stacked one on top of each other, right? They're kind of squeezed together, one kind of beside each other. To me, pseudostratified columnar looks like you took simple columnar and smushed it together, and everything's kind of like all stuck together. And the key to picking it out in the microscope is your nuclei alternate. So you have one nuclei at the top, then the next nucleus at the bottom. Next one at the top, next one at the bottom. So you see that pretty alternating look to your nuclei. And that was always the most helpful to me. The other big help is you see how prominent the cilia are? Does everybody see the little hairs on the top of the cells? Okay? Because pseudo-stratified columnar is almost always ciliated. Simple columnar just has cilia every now and then. Okay? These have one function, to secrete and move mucus. Okay? So they do what the others did, we just talked about, but that's just the only thing they do. So in a lot of the places in your respiratory system, you have this. Okay? Only other place in the body that you have pseudostratified is going to be in some of the ducts that carry sperm through the male reproductive system, like the vas deferens, ejaculatory duct, but you'll learn all of those in A&P too. Okay, so for now, make sure you can keep up with respiratory system. And how do you remember it? Because I told you a gross story about having to pull the dirty mucus up out of your respiratory system and swallow it. Okay, have a reason for doing things. Okay. Next epithelial tissue is stratified squamous. Stratified means what? Many layers, right? If we look over here, it just kind of looks like a big mess. But you can sort of tell that the basement membrane's down here somewhere, right? Because can you see how the tissue changes on one side of my line compared to the other? Okay. This white underneath is actually connective tissue. Okay. This epithelial tissue right here, the stratified squamous, you see how every cell is touching another cell? All the cells are compacted really tightly together. Why is this called squamous? Do all of those cells look flat? Kind of squished, yeah. But we name stratified by what the outermost cells look like. Do those look flat? Yeah, even the nuclei look like they've been smushed flat because it's that squamous of a cell. Okay? Now, what do we think the function of this really thick, highly regenerative tissue is going to be? Why do I keep it on my skin, the outside of my skin? To protect what's underneath. That is why, that's the function of stratified squamous epithelium. That's why we put it in the places that we put it. Most common place that you have stratified squamous epithelium is the outside of your skin. On the outside of your skin, it's actually keratinized, and we'll talk about that in the next chapter. You also have this lining portions of your esophagus, in the mouth, and also in the vaginal canal, because those are other places where abrasion is going to happen. Now don't laugh. I tried to say that nicely, okay? So in every area for protection, mainly from abrasion, okay? Good. Now slow me down if I start going too fast. The last type of epithelial tissue is transitional epithelium. It's a very special type of epithelial tissue that the cells almost look like they're circular. At the very top, as you get out, the cells get this nice rounded appearance. Okay? Now, it is found in only one place in the body, the bladder and portions of the ureters, which help drain into the bladder. What is your bladder good at? Bladder doesn't secrete nothing. Your bladder holds stuff, right? What happens to your bladder as you put urine in it? It stretches. Your bladder, when there's nothing in it, is flat. And your bladder can stretch. It's different for everybody, but almost to the size of two of your hands. And then after you go to the bathroom, it can flatten back down, stretch back out. That is the only function of these cells. You will learn in A&P 2, absolutely nothing happens to your urine when it's in your bladder. It's just sitting there. Okay? All these cells are doing is stretching to hold the area. Okay? Okay? All right. So that's all for epithelial tissue. Remind me what the 5 characteristics of epithelial tissue are before we go any further. Number 1. That is the shape. I want the 5 characteristics. Number 1, you can tell the top from the bottom. That's polarity. That's number 1. Closely packed together. All cells are touching each other. Basement membrane with connective tissue underneath. Quit looking, think. No blood vessels, but you do have nerves. Highly regenerative. Okay, just checking, see who was awake. All right, now we're going to move into connective tissue, and we will not finish connective tissue today because we're going to break connective tissue down into a few subcategories. Okay, first we will go over what we call connective tissue proper. That is just the connective tissue that does not have another special name, so they thought it needed one. Okay. Then we will go over cartilage, bone, and blood. All of these are types of connective tissue. Therefore, if we try to list the functions of connective tissue, we can say it can bind, protect, insulate, and transport. Okay? So I don't want you to learn the functions of all of them together. Just like with epithelial tissue, I want you to learn the function of each individual tissue. Okay? So let's start looking at them like we did with epithelium. Now, all of our connective tissues are going to have 3 parts. Okay? The first part of your connective tissue is your ground substance. Okay? Kind of a weird name, but your ground substance is kind of the liquid part of the tissue. Okay? Your other 2 components of your tissue, and they're on the next few slides, are your fibers and your cells. So really the easiest way to think of your ground substance is to know it's everything but a fiber and a cell. Okay? The ground substance is what looks different in each type of tissue. Okay? What do you think the ground substance of blood is going to look like? Is it going to be liquidy or solid? Liquidy. What do you think the ground substance of bone is going to be like? Very solid. Okay, so now you kind of getting a picture for what ground substance is? I don't want you to learn all the components of ground substance because it can get kind of complicated. I just listed a few of them on here so you'd have an idea of what it is, and because some of these words will be familiar to you. Okay, there's varying amounts of fluid in your ground substance. There's different adhesion proteins that hold everything together. There's a bunch of proteoglycans. I bet some of you have heard of some of these. Have you ever heard of chondroitin? If you've ever looked at any of those pill bottles that your grandma or grandpa probably takes, somebody probably told them you should take a chondroitin supplement for your bones and your muscles and your cartilage. Okay, yes, if you believe that when you eat it, it can get from your stomach, through your intestines, into your blood, then go to the other connective tissue you want it to go to. I'm not saying don't take it, but it's better to just eat a piece of chicken and not be really picky and make sure you're only eating meat. And don't look at me like I'm gross. I have seen some of you guys eat things like hot wings. Y'all eat more than the meat. You eat the cartilage and some of the other pieces of the chicken when you eat it. That's better than taking a chondroitin supplement. Just actually eat your chicken. Don't be fancy and order a chicken breast. Order the whole piece of chicken. Okay? So that was your tip for the day. Don't take all those supplements. All right? Component number 2 of connective tissue are the fibers. There are 3 types of fibers, and you saw these in lab. Number 1 is collagen. Number 2 is elastic. And number 3 is reticular. Collagen fibers are the most abundant. They are the strong fibers. They are what keeps everything in the tissue nice and firm. So if a tissue has a bunch of collagen in it, that tissue's function is going to be what? Strength. It's going to be strong, right? Let's say it's holding two things together and it's got a bunch of collagen in it. I know it's because I don't want those two things moving a lot. I want them held firmly in place. Okay? Elastic is your stretchy fiber. So if I have a connective tissue with a ton of elastic fiber in it, what's that tissue good for? Stretching, right? I'm going to put it in places connecting two things that I want to have a little bit of give, a little bit of play. Okay? The third type is reticular. They're really highly branched, teeny tiny collagen fibers. They're only found in just a couple places in the body in things like reticular tissue. And those are going to be part of your lymphoid tissue, and we're going to look at those in just a second. Okay? The third component of connective tissue are your cells. Okay? And we're going to use two words for cells. We don't just call them cells. We call them blasts and sites. Okay? If it's called a blast, that means it's an immature cell. If it's called a site, it's a mature cell. Now, if you're looking in the microscope, I would never ask you, is that a blast or a site? You can't tell. They look the same, but physiologically they do different things. A site is a mature cell that's doing things like producing ATP, undergoing normal cellular metabolism. A blast is more of a stem cell that is still focusing on producing more DNA, undergoing mitosis, things like that. Okay? Now, each type of connective tissue, we put a different prefix on blast or site so that we can make it complicated and have a bunch of different cell names. Okay? If it's connective tissue proper, it's a fibroblast. If it's cartilage, we use chondro. So it's a chondroblast, chondrocyte. If it's in bone, it's an osteoblast, osteocyte. Okay? When you get into bone marrow, adipose tissue, then you're going to get some other special cells like fat cells or hematopoietic stem cells, which don't worry about now. We're going to learn what they are a little later. The main ones is if I show you a piece of cartilage and I ask you, what type of cell is that right there? You should be able to tell me, okay, I know this is cartilage, so it's a chondrocyte or a chondroblast. Okay? That's the extent of what I want you to be able to do with this. Okay? So what we're going to do now, I don't have my generic picture anymore. Sorry. Okay, so we're going to pretend I have a generic picture. So as we start looking at these connective tissues, you need to find the ground substance, the fibers, and the cells in each of the tissues. That is how you're going to identify which type of tissue you're looking at. Okay? Now, do any of you remember from lab, how do we recognize a collagen fiber? They look more like sticks. They were what color most of the time? They were pink most of the time. They're pretty thick, right? That was the collagen fiber. What did the elastic fiber look like? Thin, darker in color, usually kind of squiggly. They weren't as straight, stick-like. Okay? Reticular looked like what? Tree branches, right? Remember my horrible drawing? Okay, good. So, if we start with connective tissue proper, we're going to then subcategorize the subcategory into loose connective tissue and dense connective tissue. Okay? For those of you that just rolled your eyes at me, I did not categorize it this way. This is the way it is, and I'm just trying to present it to you. Okay? What do you think is the difference between loose connective tissue and dense connective tissue? The looseness or the denseness of it, okay? Right? The loose connective tissue is going to have the fibers and the cells not packed as tightly together. You're going to see more ground substance in the loose connective tissue. In the dense connective tissue, the fibers and the cells are going to be pretty much stuck together. Okay? You're going to see less ground substance in your dense connective tissue. Okay? All right, so let's make it through a few of them. First loose connective tissue is called loose connective tissue, also areolar connective tissue. Okay? When you look at this, tell me what type of fibers you see. Collagen and elastic. Very good. The pink ones are the collagen fibers. They're thicker, more straight. The elastic are the dark purple, skinnier, a little bit more twisty. Okay? Areolar connective tissue is placed in your body in places that you need a little bit of cushion. Okay? Is it going to be extremely elastic and bouncy? Is it full of elastic fibers? No, there's more collagen than elastic, right? So what I hope you can do is that you can look at this and say, well, it's kind of strong, but it's also a little stretchy. That's the perfect consistency for something that would provide a little cushion, right? Think about the bottom of a trampoline. It's pretty firm, right? But it gives enough if you jump on it that it doesn't hurt you, right? But if it gave too much, what would you do? You'd hit the ground, right? So that's what this areolar connective tissue's got. Just enough stretch in it, just enough strength to provide cushion. Number one place we have areolar connective tissue in our body is underneath epithelia. What does that mean? That means underneath every type of tissue we've looked at before now is areolar connective tissue. Okay? So right here on my arm, I've got stratified squamous epithelium. Right underneath it, I have connective tissue, and it is loose connective tissue. Okay? We got it? What it looks like, we got its function, we know where it is, right? Okay. Next one is adipose tissue. What does adipose mean? Fat tissue. How do you look at this and know this is fat tissue? You see fat, right? What does it look like? It's like bubbles. I think it looks like bubbles. Some of you had other ideas. It doesn't mean your idea is wrong, but the ones that agree with me are correct. Okay? It looks like bubbles. Those bubbles are actually fat globules. Okay? This whole thing right here, including the fat globule, is an adipocyte. It's adipose, adipocyte. Okay? The cells in adipose tissue have the ability to swell and store fat on the inside of them. Okay? How many of you think when you lose weight that the fat cells go away? They don't. Okay? They shrink. So if you gain weight, okay, all you're doing is putting fat in those cells. If you lose weight, you're letting fat go out of those cells, and the cells are shrinking back down. So does that mean some people are born with the ability to be skinnier than others? That is true, okay? And I love to be able to say that. That's why I don't weigh 80 pounds, all right? It's because some people are born with more fat cells than other people. That's why it's easier for some people to be thinner than others. There's other reasons, but just make some of you feel good today, okay? So what's the function of fat? Please tell me we don't have to study that. We know the function of fat, right? Insulation, keeps you warm. What else? Protection. Give you the best example. Your kidneys are down here. Your rib cage stops here. If your kidneys were just sitting there right underneath your skin, if somebody just poked you too hard in your kidney, it would damage your kidney. Your kidneys are surrounded by fat. That's what protects your kidneys back there. You can still hit them hard enough and hurt somebody, but the fat protects you. Okay? Good. Insulation, protection, what else? One very important one. Support, yeah, okay. Energy storage, right? If you haven't eaten anything today, your body is going to go find some fat stored somewhere, and it's going to break it down and make some energy. Okay? That's a good thing. You may think, I don't need to break down, why do I need to break down fat? Why do I need to store fat? I've got other stuff. You want your body to break down fat before it starts breaking down protein, because your muscles are made of protein. Okay? Muscles are kind of important. Okay? So where do we have fat at? Kidneys and eyeballs. Yeah, where else? Mammary regions, thank you. What else? Abdomen. Gluteal region, right? Think about the regions, and everybody will have a different one. Think about the region where you store fat. Everybody has certain places that they store it, but all of us store it in all of those places. Okay? All right, good. So that's adipose tissue. The last loose connective tissue is reticular tissue. How do I know that's reticular tissue? See tree branches. And those are what type of fibers? Reticular fibers. So the white stuff is the ground substance. The black things are the reticular fibers. What are these purple things? Those are cells, right? Those are all the different cells. You don't know what type of cells. You're not there yet. You're still at the beginning of A&P. Okay? The only place in your body you have reticular tissue is in your lymphoid tissues. So that means we really ain't going to look at this again until we get to A&P 2. So this class is designed for you to have to remember that. When we get to lymphatic system in A&P 2, this picture should pop in your head, and they all look like this. Okay? Does anybody know what your lymphatic tissues are responsible for? Oh, good. Not hormones. I heard the answer. What did somebody say? Fighting infections, protecting your body from something that is invading you. Okay? So, how do you think this tissue is going to help you with that? What if I told you each of these individual type of cells was part of your immune system? Okay? So the function of this tissue, it's kind of hard to just write it down because its function is to provide structure for the lymphatic organ, which is protecting your body from infection. So all these different little cells have different abilities of fighting different things that invade your body. So in general, I'm not going to ask you anything specific about function, but you should know where it's found, and it has something to do with protecting your body from infection. Okay? What time does this class end? Am I wrong? Is it not 1:30? It is 1:30. Okay. All right. Well, so this is where I want to stop today. I don't want to start something I can't finish. Next time we'll go through the dense connective tissues, and probably, yeah, we'll finish all the tissues in our next class period.